Months in office, President Donald Trump has claimed that US has now become the hottest and most respected country in the world. This comes at a time when his approval rating has dipped to an all-time low of 42%. As per a CBS YouGov poll, Trump's first 6 months have seen significant moments, including foreign policy shifts and crackdown on immigration. As the White House puts it, Trump's biggest message to the world has been that the days of ripping off America and Americans are officially over. The president announced sweeping reciprocal tariffs on all of US's trading partners on April 2nd. He set a deadline of July the 9th for countries to negotiate trade deals and later pushed it to the 1st of August. These tariffs are in addition to sector-specific tariffs on auto, steel and aluminium. He has also threatened to impose tariffs as high as 200% on pharma imports. So far, US has inked trade deals with the UK, China, Vietnam, Indonesia. Deals with the European Union, Japan, India and several other countries are yet to be done. Trump's deal with China eased export curbs on rare earth elements on the Chinese side and curbs on chips from the American side. Trump also claimed to have used trade as a leverage to put an end to the conflict between India and Pakistan. After the Pahalgam terror attack, that's something that India has repeatedly rejected. The US president also intervened in the Israel-Iran war in June by ordering military strikes against Tehran's nuclear facilities. The 12-day conflict between Iran and Israel eventually came to an end after mediation by US and Qatar. In his election campaign, Trump had promised to end the Russia-Ukraine war within 24 hours. But that is yet to happen despite attempts at peace negotiations. To understand the implication of Trump's big policy moves, joining us right now is John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor of the USA. Bolton has also served as US Ambassador to the United Nations. Thank you very much for being with us, Ambassador Bolton. Let me begin by asking you about US actions to stop Russia. They've not stopped Vladimir Putin so far. What options does President Trump really have with Russia at this point?
Well, I think the 6 months that he's devoted to trying to get a ceasefire showed just how determined that Moscow is to pursue this war. It's increased its military activity. There's still prospects of further offensives this summer. Sanctions that have been imposed on Russia have not really slowed it down, and the war in Ukraine on the ground obviously continues. So what Trump has basically threatened, if by about the beginning of September, there's not a serious ceasefire in place, that he would consider tariffs and secondary sanctions against Russia. Most people, including people in the Kremlin, think that's a pretty hollow threat. So my view is that what Trump is really trying to do is find a way to extricate himself from the Ukraine-Russia war. He did the right thing by authorizing the deployment of Patriot missile air defense systems, which will begin fairly shortly. But he's made no longer-term commitment to supplying Ukraine with military assistance. I think what Trump sees on this is that his effort at diplomacy has failed, and he'd like to extricate himself from the Ukraine war.
So you mean to say, Ambassador Bolton, that we could see within the next few weeks that President Trump may not want America to have nothing to do with this war?
Right. He's been very careful not to make any long-term commitments for continuing assistance to Ukraine. Now, action in Congress is moving in the direction of authorizing more, and it's possible that Trump will continue to supply munitions, ammunition, military intelligence. But I don't think his decision on the Patriots, for example, indicates a wholesale reversal of his view that he's not taking any sides in the war. I think he's just trying to satisfy the humanitarian concern that many of the Russian attacks, ballistic missile and drone attacks, have been against civilian population centers. But he knows that people look at what's happened on the diplomatic front. They recognize he didn't come close to his campaign pledge about resolving the war in 24 hours. And when he sees failure like that, his instinct is to try to move away from it.
Right. So when you say extricate and move himself away from the Russia-Ukraine war and attempts at diplomacy, what does that exactly mean, Ambassador Bolton, briefly?
Well, I think it could mean a cutoff of military assistance to Ukraine and basically a cessation of Trump's efforts to get a ceasefire or a permanent solution. He might come back to it later in his second term, But I think he's in the near term, he's got a lot of other things on his plate, including, in particular, the tariff disputes that you mentioned a moment ago with every one of our major trading partners.
He started off a major trade war with Europe as well. And at the beginning of the administration, he even went on to say that Europe has to look out for itself. They have to fund their own security. They must increase their defense budgets, which the EU has now committed to doing. But the kind of relations that US and EU have had in the last 6 months, how is that going to impact Europe and US-EU relations over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think it's going to have a very negative relation. I think that there's very widespread agreement in the U.S. across the political spectrum that we hope NATO allies would spend more in our collective defense effort. That's not a view that's unique to Trump. But by declaring trade war on the European Union, but also Britain, Canada, Mexico, Japan, South Korea, India, China, essentially every other country in the world, Trump has really done the U.S. a great deal of damage. And it's not just the economic damage, the cost of the tariffs or the uncertainty that's been interjected into the economic system. It's the loss of trust, goodwill, reliance, our effort to build closer relations with not just close allies already, but many other countries around the world. I don't think he sees that damage, but I think our businesses do. And I think it's going to have very long-lasting consequences.
Right. Let me also ask you about US-China relations. How do you think US-China relations are going to progress from here on, or could they worsen?
Well, I think they're likely to worsen. You mentioned the deal that was struck on the importation into the U.S. of critical minerals like rare earths, and the reciprocal action being reduction on controls of computer technology to China. We'll see how long that lasts, but the rest of the trade relationship is also still very much up in the air. And the August 1 deadline that applies to most reciprocal tariffs has a counterpart with China in early August. The deadline for resolving the dispute that Trump has created with the tariffs also comes due. So we're in a period, perhaps the next 30 days, on tariffs where it's going to be very active. And obviously, countries are watching each other. China wants to see what progress the EU makes. The EU's watching China. People are watching India. So there's a lot of uncertainty and hesitation. And of course, that has its own negative economic effect as companies defer decisions because they don't know what the lay of the land will be.
Right. In terms of the role that China is likely to play in the Indian subcontinent, and generally the kind of ambitions that China has, how would you weigh in and give your views?
Well, I think China is in the process of trying to increase its influence all around its broad Indo-Pacific periphery. We can see it intruding its ships more into the territorial waters of Japan, not just the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea, but Japan itself. We know about the threats to Taiwan. We know what's happening in the South China Sea. We know the increased Chinese efforts to exert influence in Pakistan and the threat posed along the line of actual control with India. So I think this broadening Chinese threat should tell countries along its periphery that they should act in concert to try and deter aggressive Chinese behavior. That's why I've thought for quite some time that efforts at closer U.S.-Indian relations are so important, why the Asian Security Quad with Japan and Australia could be important. So to me, this is just about the last time you want to have a trade dispute between the United States and India. It just counteracts the natural tendency to think we'd have better cooperation on security matters if we're having a trade war between us at the same time.
Right. You're talking about US-India relations. What does Donald Trump really want from India? There was a lot of positive messaging on the possibility of trade deal between India and the United States. Currently, there is no status whether there will be an interim deal before the 1st of August or we'll have a deal by September or October. where do you think India-United States relations are going? And does this administration and Donald Trump and his inner circle really consider India to be that buffer, the bulwark against China?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think there's enough strategic thinking in the White House to give you a clear answer to that question. These issues are siloed on the trade side. Trump listens to a certain group of people, and it's if he doesn't realize that sitting in New Delhi, for example, it's the issues are not siloed. They want to know why we're having these disputes on trade issues at the same time on security issues. There should be closer cooperation. Trade is always difficult, whether it's between adversaries or friends. Lots at stake for the countries involved, and you need to work through it in a responsible fashion. I don't think Trump's threats about tariffs and other remedies against India or any of our other close trading partners make any sense, but that's the way he's proceeding. And I think the net effect of it will be damaging to the United States and make it harder for India and the U.S. to cooperate on some of these important strategic issues.
Right. I would like to ask you, a trade deal between India and U.S. may or may not happen. How do you think either of the scenario will impact the U.S. approach to India?
Well, I think it'll complicate things. If I understand the state of the trade negotiations between India and the U.S., which I don't think many people do, it does not look like there will be a deal by August the 1st. Certainly not a comprehensive deal. Even the deals that have been announced with the United Kingdom, for example, are really headline deals. Many of the important details remain to be worked out. I think it's impossible in the 10 days we have left until August 1 that we're really going to see a lot of comprehensive breakthroughs. And if Trump does what he says he's going to do, which of course is always open to question, but if he goes according to his plan, he'll simply announce what the tariffs are going to be. And they will go into effect on August 1st or shortly thereafter. I think that will be very damaging, certainly with respect to U.S.-India discussions and relations, but with almost all of our close allies.
Right. So you feel that any India-U.S. trade deal before the 1st of August looks impossible at this juncture?
Well, it could be that enormous progress is being made behind the scenes, but that's not what I'm hearing. These are complicated issues. As I say, a lot's at stake for both countries. Normally, a big trade deal would take a year to negotiate, and people are trying to do it in just a few months. It's very haphazard. It's put a lot of uncertainty into the international economy, and the uncertainty alone is having a negative effect.
Right. Let me move on and ask you about the Middle East. We had seen U.S. backing Israel in the war against Iran. What has that really led to? Iran has initiated talks with European countries, also China, on the nuclear issue. U.S. and Iran are going to be talking this week. Are we going anywhere in terms of putting curbs on Iran's nuclear program?
Well, I think the U.S. and Israel have put some pretty substantial curbs on it by very successful bombing raids. They have not totally and completely obliterated the program, as Trump said, but I'm confident that the damage has been very extensive. And when you combine that with the setbacks that Iran has seen to its terrorist proxy groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis that have been significantly damaged, the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, a key Iranian ally, and now the damage done internally to the nuclear and ballistic missile programs, I think the regime is in deep trouble. I think we can see evidence of that. So, but at the same time, they've shown no indication whatever they're prepared to give up the nuclear weapons program. So I don't see anything coming diplomatically in the next weeks. And at some point, the Europeans are going to have to decide whether, given Iran's intransigence on the nuclear front, they go to the Security Council and invoke the snapback mechanisms that the Council resolution approving the 2015 nuclear deal put into effect. They're looking at September 1 as a deadline. So that's really very close in terms of the issues at stake here.
Right. Speaking about the Middle East, how do you think President Trump's approach to the Middle East will impact U.S. relations there in the next 5 years?
Well, I think what's most important is what's happening in the war unleashed by Hamas against Israel on October the 7th. I think Israel's position is much stronger. Iran's is much weaker. The U.S.'s is stronger. So I think the possibility of more Abraham Accords between the Gulf Arab states and Israel are very real. I think if we could get to greater peace and stability in the region, which probably won't come until the regime in Tehran is overthrown. But if we could get greater peace and stability, then the concept of the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, I think, would be much more likely to come into play. So there's a lot of emphasis on the region, as is typically the case in American foreign policy, because it has an impact on India, it has an impact on Europe, has an impact on us.
Right. I would also like to ask you about whether there has been any significant policy change vis-a-vis Pakistan. The US president has been speaking since the conflict between India and Pakistan almost on a weekly basis. He speaks about how he stopped the war between India and Pakistan through the use of trade deals. Pakistan Army Chief General Munir was at the White House recently for a lunch with Donald Trump. The US is also negotiating a trade deal with Pakistan, and Donald Trump seems to always speak about Pakistan and India in the same breath. Has anything changed in the White House vis-a-vis Pakistan?
I think Trump has badly misunderstood what happened in the aftermath of the recent terrorist attack in Kashmir. I think it was the two sides that figured out they wanted to bring the escalation to a halt. But General Munir, has offered to nominate Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. He actually beat Israel's Bibi Netanyahu, who also offered to nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. People may laugh at this, but it's a big objective of Donald Trump personally. So that may have something to do with it.
Right. My final question to you, sir, would be, what, according to you, is the biggest foreign policy challenge for Donald Trump as of now? Biggest national security challenge and foreign policy challenge?
Well, I think unquestionably for the United States, really, for as far as the eye can see, the threats posed by China along its periphery, the axis that Beijing is forming with Moscow. It's not complete, it's not finished, it's still underway, but looks like the Sino-Soviet alliance of Cold War days, but this time Beijing is very much in charge. And Beijing looks at its efforts to achieve hegemony in what they call a whole of society approach, not just militarily or geopolitically, but economically and socially as well. So dealing with that threat from Beijing under its current regime, I think is our biggest challenge, and really the biggest challenge the world as a whole will face.
All right. Ambassador Bolton, thank you so much for joining us on Global Lens, giving us your overview on Donald Trump's foreign policy priorities over the last 6 months and what really has been achieved.
Well, thanks for having me.